of Christmas on December 25th just co-opting a Roman pagan festival? Look, y'all are pretty confident that Jesus was not born on December 25th. I actually think it's a bit more complicated than perhaps you recognize. That being said, why don't we start by asking, why did the early church put that as the date in the first place? Well, one of the most common stories that people tell is that the early church put the date for Christmas on December 25th because they were co-opting a Roman pagan festival. Whether Saturnalia or Sol Invictus, there are different versions of the story depending on who you ask. By all accounts and the research that I've done for this seems to be just kind of a made-up story. It's the assumption that because these correlated in the calendar, that is the Christian observance of the birth of Christ, and then the celebration of either Sol Invictus or Saturnalia in the Roman Empire, because they happened at the same time of the year and were happening at the same geographic location, people just assume that one must have caused the other. And in this case, the assumption is that the pagan practice influenced the Christian practice. But there's actually no sourcing behind that. There's not one Christian source that says it, and there's no pagan source, no Roman source that says that that influence happened either. And like any beginning logic student can tell you, correlation does not equal causation. Some other reasons why I think this is kind of a made-up story. One is the assumption that Constantine's involved in the institution of this date for Christmas. So the story goes, the Emperor Aurelius begins the Sol Invictus festival at the end of the 3rd century. Constantine takes power, institutes Christianity as the major religion of the Roman Empire, and at that point he begins to try to take in Roman practices into the Christian sphere. I mean, some of that's true, right? So certainly Constantine gets his hands in the mix, but the assumption is then that Constantine's the one who picks the date for Christians, which basically just comes from the fact that the church at Rome began celebrating Christmas on December 25th during his reign. But no one ever actually says that Constantine's involved in that decision. And at this point, we're pretty late in his reign where he's trying to establish Constantinople as the centerpiece of the Roman Empire. So wouldn't he have instituted it at Constantinople? Well, the church in Constantinople doesn't actually start observing Christmas until after his death. So that makes it unlikely. The other is the assumption that the church's focus on the imagery of the sun and associating with the birth of Messiah is a pagan idea that's made its way into the Christian sphere. Except that that's not pagan, that's prophetic. And in fact, it's prophetic in a way that predates Saturnalia and Sol Invictus by centuries. So that assumption's just frankly biblically ignorant. It's not at all what's happening in the case of the early Christians. And then the last reason is early Christians actually have a good reason for why they've put the date on December 25th. And it has nothing to do with pagan festivals and is actually integrated into the whole vision of what the calendar looks like for Christians, centered primarily around Jesus' death and resurrection. What's that logic? Well, you have to check back for our next video where I answer why Christians put the date on December 25th in the first place.